So I've come up with a potential solution to the monsters not wanting to navigate to this volume here, this trigger monster zone. Um, we have this trigger here at the entryway, and it's targeting these funk monster spawners, and that target eventually gets passed through to this monster zone, and the monsters aren't wanting to navigate to this zone. Just run here. All these soldiers just sort of pack into this corner. I think where they're trying to go is to the world origin, and they should be trying to go to the center of this volume here. Let's see where this guy goes. See, he just wants to be in this corner. So what I think needs to happen is essentially you just need to spawn in a path corner where I want the monsters to go in the zone in the Quake script. And so it would be part of the trigger monster zone spawn function. I would spawn just a point entity in the center of this zone, and I would pass the monster zone's target name to this point entity, and then clear out the target name of the monster zone, so that when these guys spawn in and they look for a goal entity, when they look for a move target, what they're going to find is the corner entity, or the generic point entity, in the middle of this zone that they can navigate to instead of the zone itself. And then when we actually do the monster zone touch for the trigger, instead of checking if the zone's target name is the same as the target on the monster, we check if the zone's move target is the same as the monster. So I'm going to try implementing that change. So what we need to do is put in a spawn function here. So should be able to do something like entity path equals spawn. Haven't done this in a little bit. And then we would set, say, path dot target name equals self dot target name. And just to keep that target name associated with the trigger somehow, I'm going to add self dot target equals self dot target name, and self dot target name equals, I'm going to put a string here. I don't know that it has to be in quotation marks, but it wants a string. And this path needs an origin. We don't want, do we want self to origin? I'm going to test with that. But that might be the same thing that was leading the monsters to not find the center of the volume. So what do we have here? Spawn it in, it has an origin, the target name. Self.target is just compare that to spawning in a mobot. Bot equals spawn. Okay. So it's a local entity. I'm going to use that syntax. So path equals spawn. Let's make that a local entity path. Let's see what that does. I'm going to need to compile this. Replace the old one with the new. Save, and we'll run the map again. See where these guys go. So that didn't work, evidently. Actually, if we go into developer, let's actually restart this. So we got the target name. Right, we don't have the class name here. It doesn't have a class name, so that probably wouldn't be very useful. But I'm thinking the problem is that there isn't a defined origin in this zone. If we look at information associated with this brush entity, we have that target name WB1 and a class name, some spawn flags. If we look at these points entities, they have an actual origin. So I think what I need to do is somehow get an origin to be associated with these brush entities somehow, because otherwise I need to manually place a path corner for every zone, which is also a viable option. I mean, it's not that much more effort. I was just hoping that this could be a one-step process, just drawing the zone that I want the enemies to run into. So I'm going to think about that for a minute and then implement whatever seems best. So I've changed this setup so the monsters are all targeting this path corner in the center of the monster zone right now. One disadvantage of this is that the path corner, if I drop it inside the monster zone, it becomes really difficult to select, which is just sort of an inconvenience when editing, but it has the advantage of now I can move this path corner sort of anywhere inside or technically outside the zone. I'm not really sure how I would use that, but it's one more thing that I can do now. I went into the code, got rid of all of my previous changes, and now I just modified monster zone touch because the zone itself, the trigger, is targeting the path corner. There might be consequences to that I haven't thought of yet, but I think I'll just test this, see what happens. I know it's not going to be everything that I want to happen, but I'd like to see whether or not the monsters are able to navigate to the path. At this point, I've already saved the level, so I should just have to run. Get into dev mode, see what's going on. Seem to be doing the exact same thing they were doing before. That's not great. So what are they doing? A lot of move to goal. They have that goal entity, or yeah. The goal entity target name is WB1. So they should be going over here. So in this demonstration, that's what they do. So what else is different? So here we have everyone's targeting, they're all targeting one path corner. These guys are all targeting separate path corners. So that's something. Their target, WB1, it's a path corner. Right. WA1, it's a path corner. It's very similar setups. Oh, I didn't compile. That's the kind of mistake that I'm constantly making. So, look at that. They all came to the center area, and as you can see, it's kind of hard to read with this font, but we're getting monster zone touch. So they are running into the volume, triggering the volume. Now I just need to implement the actual behavior that I want them to show once they enter this volume, because I can't just have them standing here being like idiots. So what I had before, if I didn't show it, was I was using a trace line function with the brush entity here. Essentially, the monsters would enter this box. They would get the run style as inbox flag, not a flag, but that this would be put into their run style field. And when they had that property, they would essentially test where they wanted to go, create a trace line from where they wanted to go to where they are, and it was hunting for, is it intersecting with this trigger monster zone? That's pretty similar to the way the onLookAt targets work in Prog's dump, except backwards. And it really wasn't working for me. And just working with less than idealized conditions, I guess, for using traceline in that way. But I decided to switch over from trying to control essentially the space in which the monsters are acting to trying to control the time. Essentially, if the monsters are in this volume, then I know that within a very short amount of time, they aren't going to be significantly outside of this volume. They can find their way out pretty fast, maybe, but ideally, a monster goes over here, and 1 second later, it might be over here, but it's not going to be completely lost. And so if instead of asking permission to move to any points, I just say, you've been in this volume, that means in the next seconds, I don't really care where you go. But if you're not in the volume after 1 second, I'm going to make you turn around. That's essentially my new solution towards keeping the monsters generally contained. So I simplified this function a lot, took out all this and just made it a time check. If they're within the time frame, they just engage the enemy. And if it's not within the time frame, then we just reset this run style, which is being set by the trigger here. And so it ends up looking like this. See, the monsters initially run towards the volume, towards a waypoint. But now that they're in sort of anarchy, they just sort of fight me. But you see, they don't ever fully leave the room, because that would take more than 1 second, and so they have to go back to where they were. So I think this is a good sort of a compromise to controlling the exact geometry where these guys can go. All right, so I got one more thing working today, using the, or for the first scenario here on the left, using the path corners. I now have it so that another, or a zone spawns in a trigger zone. This isn't a brush entity, it's a point entity, but it functions the same. The only sort of a hack thing I had to do was, in order for this to work, the trigger zone volumes had to be fairly large. So if I show the bounding boxes, you can see where the points entities, the path corner point entities were. And then you see the bounding boxes for the automatically filled in trigger zones. But now when I spawn these guys in, they'll run to their pathing corners, and then they become a little bit more aggressive and start fighting me, which is pretty much along the lines of what I was hoping for. And it's all because I switched over from trying to control the position of the enemies to controlling their time distance away from the objectives. So moving forwards, what I'm going to be working on next is filling out a few more complicated scenarios, trying to put together some of the prototypes from previous map. So this one, getting it working in the new system, infighting, more complicated behaviors, looking at ways I can sort of punish players for trying to cheese an interaction, and just make the AI seem smarter.